learning exchange, also known as Lessons. So Lessons is a component of the Communities in Pandemic Preparedness and Response, or COPPER Knowledge Hub. So it's under the COPPER project implemented by the Activists Coalition on TB Asia Pacific, or ACT-AP, and it's hosted under APCASO and the Africa Coalition on Tuberculosis, or ACT Africa. So this webinar is co-hosted also by our partners, Regional Learning Hub of Anglophone Africa and the Hub Regional of Afrique Francophone. So I'm RJ Nagit. So I will be your Knowledge Hub facilitator for the series of lessons webinar. And of course, I'd also like to invite everyone to answer the learning needs assessment, which we shared in our WhatsApp group chat. And before we officially start the event, I'd like to just set some reminders for all of the participants here. So as was already done already, the meeting is currently being recorded. And kindly set your Zoom name to the specified format. So you can use your, of course, you put your name and then your pronouns. So if you identify as male, then you can put he or him. And then if you identify as female, or you can actually put she or her. And then it's followed by your organization. And then just a reminder to mute your microphone when not speaking and turn on cameras if you're comfortable with it. And Zoom actually provides us with a lot of functionalities in the platform. So kindly use the emojis and raise hands function, even if your camera is turned off, so that we can sense some sort of reaction from the participants. And if you have questions, if there's a Q&A function, you can utilize that, or you can also use the chat function for comments or insights, or if you're having technical difficulties, you can also raise it via the chat function. And then since we're having participants from different parts of the world, we'll be conducting the webinars in English and in French. So if you want to hear the French translation, you can click on the interpreter function at the bottom part of your interface. And then let's try to contribute in making this a safe space for discussions and insights. And then we also encourage you to ask questions, learn, and also contribute to the discussion afterwards. So with that, I'd like to invite everyone to introduce yourself. So we prepared a poll for this. Jeff, can you share screen from your end? So I see some of our participants already posting their introductions in the chat. That's fine. And here you can see a Menti meter. So if you have access to internet browser, you can go to menti.com and then use the code presented on the screen. So it's 34409527. So just so we can have a sense of where the participants are coming from and what their background are. So we have some questions prepared for you. So the first question is, what country are you from? And then I see that Jeff also placed on the chat the website as well as the code that we'll be using. All right. And then I'm seeing participants coming from Thailand, Indonesia, Kenya, and Tanzania. Okay. So we also have participants from the Philippines. And then in the chat, I see people from Nigeria, Cambodia, Zimbabwe, Cameroon. Also folks from Nigeria. I think I mentioned that already. We have participants from Malawi, South Africa. It's moving so fast. So I might not be able to mention all of the countries. We have Ghana, Burkina Faso, Sri Lanka, Angola, Tanzania. Switzerland, we also have colleagues from Europe joining. Okay. So basically, it's Southeast Asia, Africa, and some participants from Europe. Okay, can we move to the next question? And what organizations do you represent? So from the chat, I've seen someone from the Drug Harm Reduction Advocacy Network in Nigeria. Of course, we have our friends from the Global Fund joining us. APCASO, EANNASO, TB Survivors Network, Inti Muda Indonesia, Stop TB Kenya, ACT AP, Udayana University. So we also have participants coming from the academe. That's really good. We have Croix Rouge Camerounais. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Hopefully you can correct me in the chat. And then we also have participants from Constellation East Africa, the Aurum Institute, SAMRC. So thank you for sharing the organizations that you represent. And I think we can move to the next slide. So in here, you can put your professional background or your role in the organization that you're part of. So I see in the chat that some of you are chapter coordinators, program officers, researchers, that's good, activists, executive directors, anthropologists, senior program officer. So it's a mix of people implementing programs, people doing research, people working directly with service user organizations, some people in comms, and some in leadership positions. So it's a good mix of participants. And we can move to the next slide, I think. Thank you for sharing your roles in your organization. So as of now, I can really say that it would be a very rich community of people sharing insights coming from different perspectives. So hopefully we can maximize that, not only in this webinar, but also in the WhatsApp discussions. So the last question is more of a knowledge check where we are right now. So how much do you know about pandemic preparedness and response, which will be more or less the general theme of the lessons webinar. So you can select here 5 if you're still a beginner in terms of learning about pandemic preparedness and response. That's totally fine. Wow, a lot of you are actually saying that I'm fully aware of PPR. That's nice. But some people say that I know a few or they don't know enough. So I think that's good because okay, so now it's overtaken by I know a few. So it's quickly changing. But I really appreciate that we come from different starting points, and hopefully we can help each other out as we continue with the sessions. Okay, so someone messaged in French. So hopefully someone can help me translate that. Okay. So I think it's a good mix of participants, and we're coming from different starting points when we talk about pandemic preparedness and response. So maybe we can already proceed with um, an introduction of what lessons actually is, and then we can proceed with the program. So before anything else, before we start with the lecture, I'd like to also introduce the APCASO Program Manager and ACT AP Coordinator, Jeff Acaba, to give us a few words. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, RJ, and hello everybody who's in this call. It's nice to see 55 people from all over the globe attending this first lessons webinar under the Copper Project. So ACT AP, the Activist Coalition on TB Asia Pacific, together with ACT Africa, are very excited to really jumpstart the Copper Learning Knowledge Hub, or the Communities in Pandemic Preparedness and Response Knowledge Hub. It is a hub that aims to equip participants with knowledge about pandemic preparedness and response. And this hub is also a place where we can share information, and not only information, but also experiences, especially from the 8 countries that will be implementing the Copper Project, 5 countries in Africa and 3 countries in the Asia Pacific. But also we encourage other people who are in this webinar, in the succeeding webinars, to also participate. This lessons webinar is only one avenue where you can share your information and experiences. We'll also have a website of which we will share with you all, and we also have the WhatsApp community that is already open as well, where you can also start the discussions and the exchange. Lessons, which is technically it means a learning exchange sessions. That's the long name. The short name is lesson. So it's a webinar wherein we organize a specific number of issues, focusing on specific topics for the next 10 months. This is the first webinar, the lessons webinar that we are organizing, and this one will focus on an orientation about pandemic preparedness and response, just so all of us will be on the same page. Again, this lessons will be under the Copper Knowledge Hub, which is the hub that will facilitate the exchange and also experiences. Apart from the Knowledge Hub, I'm here, and also Rachel is on the call. We are both coordinating, and also Mook as well, also from ActAP, hosted by Apcaso. We are coordinating the implementation of copper-related activities and initiatives at the country level, which are meant to expand the work on pandemic preparedness and response, primarily inviting other partners from HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria responses and organizations, also inviting other organizations as well to participate in the implementation of copper, and expanding and ensuring that there's an increased level of community engagement in the pandemic preparedness and response at the national level, as we continue to prepare for future pandemics. It's been 4 years since COVID-19 started, and as we all know, COVID-19 wasn't the last pandemic. Technically, it was announced as the pandemic, but there's been a number of outbreaks here and there. H5N1 was one, and there are a few more. Mpox has also been. There's an increase in gonorrhea and outbreaks in gonorrhea in some places. So we live in a world of pandemics, and we have to be prepared as we continue to ensure that in the current response, we don't leave anyone behind. So I hope you enjoy these lessons webinars. This is the first one, as I mentioned, and I hope that you continue participating in the succeeding ones. So thank you. Oh, by the way, I'd like to introduce RJ as well. RJ will be our facilitator, for this series of lessons. So you will see him in the next 10 months or so, and you will be able to communicate with him through WhatsApp and through other means. Mook is also here, facilitating on behind the scenes. Is also coordinating together with me. You might be able to see her later. But if you have any questions as well, you can reach out to us anytime. Thank you, and then enjoy. Oh, back to you, RJ.
Thank you, Jeff, for that very comprehensive introduction to lessons and the Copper Project, and the things that I picked up from your short message is that pandemics are here to stay, whether of course we don't like it, but pandemics are here. There will be impacts to the community, and we have to prepare the health system to become more resilient. And a big part of that preparedness is the community engagement. That's why we're here working with civil society to strengthen and contribute meaningfully to these kinds of discussions, whether internationally or locally in your specific organizations. So we also thought of like somehow incentivizing participation. So you can actually receive a certificate of completion if you attend our webinars. So you have to achieve the 3 A's, which the acronym I actually forced because it's not technically all A's, but you have to attend the webinars, you participate in the discussion of the WhatsApp group, the community page that we have. And then we also need to accomplish the evaluation form, which will be shared with you at the end of the session. So you can receive a certificate of completion once you take off all of these three parts. But of course, beyond the certificate of completion, we want you to engage meaningfully in the discussions and learn from the webinars. So with that, we go to the meat of our discussion. So for the first webinar of lessons, we chose the topic Introduction to Pandemic Preparedness and Response. And we have our speaker already here with us. So Aggrey Aluso is the director of the Africa region at the Pandemic Action Network, where he brings over 15 years of experience in advancing intersectional justice using citizen-led, rights-based approaches in Africa. Most recently, he served as a senior manager at Open Society Initiative for East Africa's, providing oversight and thought leadership for the Health and Rights Program focused on addressing structural determinants of health in the Eastern and Southern Africa region. So he also coordinated the Open Society Africa, Pan-Africa Vaccine Justice to bolster Africa's evolving work in advancing vaccine-related research, development, and manufacturing. He has also served as the East African Policy and Advocacy Manager for the University of Manitoba's Global Institute of Public Health. And for his academic background, he holds a master's degree in gender and development from the University of Nairobi, a bachelor's degree from the Egerton University, and certificates from INSEAD on leading for results and policy and legislative drafting from the University of Johannesburg, amongst others. So everyone, let's give a round of applause to our speaker, Aggrey Aluso. Over to you, Aggrey.
Thank you, RJ. Thank you for that elaborate introduction. And apologies, I'm a little groggy. It's 6 a.m. in the morning here in Rio, where I'm joining you while attending the Global Summit on Pandemic Preparedness and Response, organized by CEPI and Fiocruz, and that's the Brazilian government. So I now have a few minutes to give you just introductory conversations. And I know in this group, definitely there are people who have probably more information than me. I'm not a doctor to begin with. I'm working in this sector as an advocate, as you saw from my background. I work mainly around issues of health equity and advancing social justice in the health sector. So that's where I have my strength. And of course, pandemic is about our lives, and we are all very invested in it because you don't need specialists to tell you how you should live your life healthy. We all experts of our lives, and we need to make the right asks from our governments in terms of the kind of investment they need to make so that we are, prepared for the next pandemics. And I think with COVID, those of us who have been unfortunate enough to live through this pandemic, I say unfortunate because this has been probably the most impactful pandemic of our time. Where everybody, I think there's nobody I've ever met who did not, experience COVID in one way or the other. Either you were sick yourself, or you lost a friend, or you lost a relative. Somebody who lost a job. Like literally everybody in the surface of this world was impacted. And as you know, pandemics are not something that is new to humanity. They've been part of human existence forever. The circumstances have changed in terms of the world being one. I think there was a part of human history when we were physically constrained from having contact with the other part of the world. And therefore, maybe one part of the world would experience epidemics or pandemics, and it would not cross to the other because, people did not have tools to cross, boundaries like water bodies and vast deserts. But I think with developments over the years, you've seen pandemics now becoming more global, like every part of the world would be impacted when there's an outbreak. They have been happening at different frequencies, so to speak, because if you look at history, the older history has more, historical bits about pandemics that used to happen. But in the modern history, I think what we know about pandemics that have happened in the recent past, in terms of past hundreds of years, not just tens. So we have between 1817 to 1923, there was 7 cholera pandemics with 6 pandemics between 1910 and 1911, killing nearly 1 million people. That was significant because the world population was not as much as it is now. And then between 1855 1960, we had the 3rd plague pandemic, which started in China and spread worldwide, killing about 12 million people in India and China alone. So you could see that have impacted on people in close proximity. So India and China, they share borders. So that means part of the world was cushioned just probably because of some accidental chance that we didn't have a lot of communication between different parts of the world then as we do now. But in I think the most impactful one in recent human history, just before COVID, and I think probably more impactful than COVID because we didn't have the tools to contain it, was between 1918 and 1920. And I'm sure most of us here must have heard about the Spanish flu pandemic, which infected about 500, nearly 500 million people, 500 million people were infected and killed up to 100 million people. And it's billed as one of the most deadliest pandemics in human history. And then we've had others, smaller ones like the Asian flu, which killed about 4 million people between 1956 and 1957, 58. And then between 67, 68, 70, there was the Hong Kong flu. I think you already in seeing that most of the pandemics are of influenza nature. So they're all flus. And then other than for the ones that are named after regions, you would also realize that they're named after animals, either bird or, monkeys or whatever. So that should be telling you something about the flus that we're talking about, that they originate mostly from animals and they are mostly influenza and influenza viruses that are able to really create that kind of havoc. And therefore, that's a very, very, intriguing virus family or families of viruses that fall in that broad category of influenza viruses. And of course, coming late, more recently, we know about the SARS outbreak, which killed about 774. And then we have the swine flu. Now you see the animal names coming in. Swine flu, between 2008, 2010, killing about 151,000 people to nearly about 500,000. You'd see also that the numbers are not definite because we don't have the correct attribution, tool sometimes. In many instances, people only have some guess, of what number of people might have died from the pandemic. So that shows the level of, evolution of tools as well in terms of capacity to even, do proper diagnostics and attribution of what, actually could have caused the death of the exact number of people. And of course, usually the instances of other causes which are being, related to the pandemic, but not exactly the virus or the influenza virus killing the people, but because systems are disrupted and therefore other opportunistic issues which are now not being taken care of, causing other deaths. And we saw that during COVID. Those of us who are working in the HIV and other existing pandemic situations, numbers in terms of the people who probably were not able to get their medicine and therefore, unfortunately, also had to, face more the impact or consequences of the pandemic, not from COVID, but because they could not access the services. And of
Agree.
course, we know about the
Um,
2040.
yeah,
Can you hear me?
apologies for interrupting. Some people in the chat are asking if you're presenting slides.
No,
Oh, okay. So
I'm
just
not presenting.
confirming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I'm not presenting slides, sorry. So, and of course, we know about the latest one, 2014, 2016, Ebola epidemic in West Africa, which killed over 11,000 people. That should have been our warning shot, but we did not wake up as quickly as we should have. And of course, the 2019 is the present day pandemic that has, really shaken the world to the core. And that is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus that has killed over 7 million people worldwide as of 2024. And so, therefore, I think key insights from the historicals of pandemics, and we will talk briefly about how pandemics are defined. That's also a very political issue with, far-reaching impact in terms of how it triggers the necessary action in time to help contain outbreaks before they become, pandemic. Because I think that is where, the difference is made. If you're able to really put in motion action in time enough, when you detect an outbreak, before it spirals out of control, that is what really the defining, factor in terms of whether we are able to contain them or they will spiral out of control and create, gigantic losses that we often see. So I think there's no certainty about the impact of pandemics that have occurred. I think a lot of what is documented, and depending on the part of history when they were, when they occurred, a lot of it is based on models and very limited information that could be, that could be gathered at that particular point in time. But what we know that pandemics really have far-reaching consequences, both in terms of the direct lives lost, in terms of the disruptions of lives and livelihoods, in terms of people, being displaced economically or physically. In the olden days when an outbreak occurred, people would literally have to move from one place to the other to avoid, being infected. In the current instances, of course, we don't have a lot of space to move. So what happens is that we lock ourselves in so that we don't spread we don't catch. And when that happens, you have to give up the economic activities. And usually the spiral effect is those who are already marginalized or those already who are facing some, economic disadvantage or social disadvantage are the ones who are more impacted. Because if you are an informal economy gig participant, you do, like business that is your own, you have to open your shop and you have to close it. In contexts where you don't have social protection mechanisms, that person has to make a decision between whether I sit in my house and die or I risk it out and go and try to make a living. So we see that the impact really, is subjective also, depending on your status as it is at that particular point in the society. And of course, we also saw how this panned out in the COVID pandemic, where people in certain parts of the world were able to resume their lives much quicker because they were able to get vaccination at the level at which it's recommended to attain what we call the herd immunity, while others were still struggling, with less than single-digit percentages of vaccination. And of course, that really created a very prolonged. Schools were closed for years. There are lots of school years lost, and you'd see, for example, families that could not afford private tuition for their children. Those are education years lost, like learning years. Children retrogress academically. So those who were able to, get virtual access to learning opportunities, their children, and that is economically mediated. So it depends on how much resource you have, whether you have access to internet, whether you have access to phones. So this has really widened the equality gap, like equities, the equity challenge has been really tenfold widened between the rich and the poor, between women and men, between girls and boys. A lot of people who lost their jobs are women, because you would see that women are the ones who are mostly involved in the front line, work, whether it is in health, whether it is in hospitality, whether it is in, small gig economies. They're the ones who are often out there, in the spaces which are most likely to be impacted when a lockdown is imposed on a population. So we've seen the huge losses, and of course, the global economy lost trillions, several trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars in terms of lost gains or lost productivity, so to speak. And of course, the capacity to bounce back. In this instance, unfortunately, some people become much richer. The pharmaceutical industries become much richer because they were now making commodities that they had the monopoly around, and they could quote whichever price they wanted. I don't know whether any of you followed some of the price tags for therapeutics for COVID. I remember one company was charging as much as $5,000 for a single dose for treatment, which did not even work eventually. So just a glimpse at, in terms of the impact of pandemics, and everybody can tell their story in terms of where they are impacted. So those are just the aggregated figures, but each of us, I lost my dad. Several people I've talked to lost their relatives, people lost jobs, it's something that we do not want to experience again in a lifetime. We really hope we don't have to experience another pandemic in a lifetime. But unfortunately, the reality of our existence is that if we don't do things differently, there is a very high probability, about 20% chance that we will experience a pandemic of COVID magnitude in 10 to 20 years if we do not do things differently, if we do not really activate our preparedness mode. Really support the evolution of the necessary capacities to detect, contain epidemics or outbreaks before they become pandemics. And that's really where the logic lies, in terms of this capacity being distributed in all parts of the world. And unfortunately, our innovation ecosystem is usually influenced by the market. And therefore, if you look at the medicine or the health issues, the trends of innovation for different health challenges, they often tend to follow where the money is. So diseases that are endemic in low-income setting are often not innovated for. And you'd find that the so-called NTDs, neglected tropical diseases, are mostly poverty-related diseases. They are in Africa, they are in Asia, some parts of the poor parts of Asia, because those who are controlling the dynamics that influence innovation follow where the potential for recouping their investments are. And that is where I think humanity has lost it, because when we innovate selectively for different markets and for different diseases, then we are creating opportunities for mutation. The ones that we're neglecting are the ones who are mutating and becoming more, virulent in terms of their capacity to spread. So for instance, you'd know that Mpox is not a new disease. It's been endemic in Africa, Central and Western Africa, for many years. It only became an issue when it crossed the borders to Europe and the Americas. And that brings me to the question of really who defines what pandemics are. That has been one of the most political questions in these conversations that we've been having around the IHR reforms and the INB, because really the definition of pandemic is something that should be scientific, but it's not always scientific. It's been defined by who is impacted. So Ebola, for example, which was ravaging West Africa, was never declared a pandemic because it was localized in Africa, even though it has potential of crossing, but it was localized. So before it crossed the borders, it was, not even, they didn't activate, because when you declare a disease, and I need to get my power cable, just give me a second. I can see my power is running out.
So while waiting for Aggrey to come back, so if you have questions or some insights regarding the first part of his discussion, feel free to utilize the chat function. And so far, Aggrey already gave us a very comprehensive timeline in terms of how pandemics happened, what their impacts are, which does not only include human lives, the economic costs, but also we see that there's a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities in that specific country, and also some equity concerns with regard to its impact across countries. Yeah, go ahead, Aggrey.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking that forward. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring to your perspective, what really is the definition of pandemics. And we tried, you may have seen it in our in our website, those of you who follow PAN, we tried to weigh in on this conversation because we really think it should be something that is standardized in a way that would trigger objective response, because the subjective definition of a pandemic, what they call public health emergency of international concern, is where what sets in motion necessary processes or necessary actions that would help now really contain. But you'd realize that the declaration of a fake, and so far between when WHO was formed to date, WHO has only declared two fakes, two public health emergencies of international concern to date. Despite us having outbreaks that have been at the level where they could have actually been could have been categorized as fake. So so that was H1N1 influenza pandemic in 2009 and the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. that is the two pandemics that have been declared by WHO. So according to the IHR, and this was recently reviewed, it was adopted in the last World Health Assembly. So IHR, International Health Regulation, is the policy or is the framework under which public health emergencies. So it creates an alert system that relies on reports from countries. So a country will define by itself, and they will take their time to consider all the potential economic cost, the political impact of making that declaration or even availing that information to the public before they actually take action. And that's where we really miss the point. Because when it's left to countries' volition, discretional assessment, we trust that countries will do the right thing. But what we have seen, countries are beholden to a lot of other interests. And everybody wants to do what is good for their country. They don't want to expose their countries. And you saw, even when after COVID, our neighbors here in Uganda, I'm from Kenya, people were actually refusing that there was Ebola outbreak because they did not want to go through the kind of motions they went through when COVID, was announced as a public health emergency of international concern. So you see a lot of resistance. So there's a lot of subjective interpretation. So when a country reports an event of IHR to the IHR alert system, so that's the WHO run International Health Regulation alert system, it must provide information about the event, including the type of event, the location, the number of cases, the severity of the cases. The country must also assess the public health risk in the event and recommend any necessary public health measures. WHO will then review all these reports, and the Director General will decide whether to declare an emergency based on the advice from the emergency committee, composed of individual experts, and which is a separate committee which is convened for each outbreak. If the WHO determines that event meets the criteria for public health emergency of international concern, it will issue a fake declaration, which is the highest alert system, the highest alert level of the WHO can formally declare under IHR. So when they declare a fake, WHO also issues an unbinding recommendation to member states of urgent measures to contain the outbreak domestically and to control international spread. So that's how, in legal text, a pandemic is declared. And of course, there are different phases of influenza pandemic alert systems. So phase one is there's no virus circulating in animals because most of our viruses come from other animals. And phase two is when there's an animal influenza virus in circulation among domesticated or wild animals, and is known to have caused infection in humans. And this is therefore considered a potential pandemic risk. If you have been following the latest developments in the public health, global public health arena, you would know that we are currently dealing, apologies. We are currently
Aggrey?
dealing with
Yeah, apologies for interrupting again. I just see that there are some hands raised. Is it all right if we take in questions in between so that we can
So can I
also...
just, so can I just finish this and then let me just take 5 minutes to wrap this up and then colleagues can
Okay.
do questions.
Yeah, okay. We're also
Apologies.
taking note of the questions on the chat.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
I will do that. I will do that. So yeah, so if you know that this currently there's a H5N1, and in this meeting where I am in Brazil, we had a presentation from Dr. Mike Ryan and Dr. Aggrey Aluso, who is they're both working in the emergency units of WHO, like top leaders. They mentioned like there's several, I think there are about 160 current outbreaks that they're monitoring at different alert levels, alert level 2 or alert level 3. I think the most concerning one is the H5N1, which is the influenza A, that is the avian influenza, which has been mostly a bad influenza, but now has crossed over to mammals. So it's human beings are getting infected. It started in the US, I think it's now in Europe. Human beings are getting infected, and it has a case fatality rate from what I had yesterday of about 50%. That is one thing that if it crosses over from, it started circulating between human and human, we are going to see a disaster that we've never seen. COVID was very low. The case fatality rate for COVID was less than 5% in different circumstances, depending on also on other demographic and health factors like underlying causes, but it was never above 50. It was mostly between 1 to 3%, but in some instances it was up to 5%, but that was the highest. This one is very high. Ebola has very high CFR, case fatality rates. Then we have, so they are phased, so it's from phase 1 to phase 5. Phase 5, or to phase 6 rather. Phase 6 is where there's now a pandemic phase that is characterized by community level outbreaks in at least one other region in different WHO regions. So, WHO regions are there like EMRO, AFRO, about many different WHO regions. So if it crosses from one region to the other, then it becomes a pandemic under phase 6 of the alert system. So that's how I can share that. That's it's a document we have put in public, and it can help you understand how this is done. And so just moving quickly to PPR. So in terms of the pandemic preparedness and response, I want to refer you to the JEE, Joint External Evaluation. Joint External Evaluation is the system that has been developed by WHO that outlines the core capacities or core competencies that countries need to work on to be able to, there are 3 main categories. So the JEE assessment covers 3 core elements. So it's a prevention, reduction of likelihood of outbreaks and other public health threats. The second part is around detection of threats. The third part is around provision of rapid and effective response, including multi-sectoral, national and international coordination and communication. So a lot of efforts usually have been around the last part. Prevention has not seen a lot of action. And those of you who have been following the INB process, the contentious issues have been around Article 5 and Article 4, which are around prevention, One Health, and pandemic prevention, and the prevention of pandemics. And Article 12 is around PAP, which is, when pathogens are isolated and you need to develop countermeasures for them, the regions which give such information are asking that they also be compensated for being, for giving such information, because without the pathogen information, you will not be able to develop countermeasures. But I think the system has been a very extractive system where they extract pathogens. Like, you'd find all the diseases that are circulating in Central Africa have, stockpiles of vaccines in rich countries. In US, like I think Ebola Sudan has a stockpile of vaccines in Canada. Mpox has stockpiles of vaccines in the US. It was for smallpox, but now it's been approved, but they don't have it in DRC, and people are dying in their hands by the day there. So that's what is being, pushed for around equity. But beyond hubs, there are so many challenges around equitable capacity to respond. Prepare, actually, I think that is where we need prepare to prevent, which means you have the surveillance capacity to know what pathogens have pandemic potential. And WHO has outlined a specific virus families. So we have known virus families. I think yesterday there was a presentation by Anna Maria from WHO. They talk about 29, but I think the priority virus families that have potential to cause pandemics are about 15. You are able, in the ideal world, we should be able to study these virus families, because most of them are actually related to diseases that we are dealing with, like the common cold. That is why the COVID vaccine was able to be discovered very quickly, because the COVID virus is in the family of the flu, the seasonal flu that we all experience. And most of these influenza virus families, the priority ones, are related to some endemic condition that we are already experiencing, that we can just expand that study and be more prepared to plug and play when we have variants that now of pandemic potential. And that's what we are not doing enough of. So there's been this conversation around a 100-day mission, which is around really organizing ourselves to be able to, activate, our systems to produce countermeasures. Countermeasures would be around therapeutics, would be around diagnostics. I think the most critical, they're saying diagnostics need to be available like on day 0. You don't have to wait for 100 days. You need diagnostics on day 0 to know what you're dealing with. And then you are able to isolate the virus, do genomic sequencing, and activate the production or the late stage innovation for that virus variant based on the information that you already have for that family, and be able to have a countermeasure within 100 days. If you do that, for instance, if we had a vaccine available for COVID within 100 days of the outbreak, we would have saved 8 million lives. That's information that I had yesterday as well. That would have saved 8 million people, who, including my dad, who died, would probably be alive today if we had activated things and gotten the necessary countermeasures in motion within 100 days. And that's where we need all the political will. It's possible. Humanity has more solutions than challenges. I think we're just guilty of innovating, selectively, depending on our motivation, mostly economic and financial and political motivation. And that is not helping anyone, because when you are selectively ignoring DRC or Central African Republic or Mozambique, you are not helping yourself, because you'll keep driving. You're like driving and constantly looking back. You'll crash, because you're not safe until everybody. You are as strong as your weakest link, and we don't seem to realize that. So our best solution is solidarity, in terms of really identifying, ring-fencing all these families of viruses with pandemic potential, and having all the tools at ready for every part of the world where they can erupt, so that we can contain them. Let me pause there and see which questions colleagues have.
All right. Thank you, Aggrey. That was a very brief but comprehensive introduction to pandemic preparedness and response. And actually, one of the things that you alluded to at the end of your discussion is we have to be like very deliberate in terms of making it a priority. So actually, one of the first questions that we received in the chat is that some of the colleagues that we have here are actually noting that PPPR hasn't been prioritized in development planning. So one of our participants is asking, is there strategies to attract government to invest in PPPR issues?
I think that is the reason why we're having this conversation, essentially, because our governments are also beholden to a lot of a lot of pressures. So we are in a world of competing priorities. And if you come from a resource-constrained context like ours, I sometimes want to think it's genuine resource constraint, but sometimes it's the prioritization as influenced by the electorate. We don't make enough demands from our government on things that matter. And you've seen consistently health being under-resourced in many contexts because it's been assumed to be the darling of the donor community. And I think we really need to rethink our development cooperation models as well, because that has created a dependency culture where we have certain things governments are budgeting for. Try telling any government that they have weakness in their defense or anything that they think is politically impactful, like they can't develop roads for their constituencies and they need to be helped by the neighboring country. They will accuse you of being a treasoners, having treasonous thoughts, wanting to exchange the sovereignty of their country with, transfer the sovereignty of their country to other regions. But they never think of this sovereignty thought in terms of human health security, because that is, in as much as we invest in armies that never go to war, the biggest threat that we have that is most likely to occur in our lifetime is an outbreak of a disease, which is equally an important security issue, just as our physical security. But I think because how we position issues, how we profile things, the kind of asks we make of our government, they will prioritize things depending on the political pressure that we put on them. So I think the buck stops with the citizens here as well. Are you making health and PPR a political priority? Are you making these demands from your government in terms of them requiring to, really investing up to the, possible amount of resources and employing those resources judiciously to really prepare themselves along the very, very, very simple JE competency, spectrum. And it makes all sense if they invest smart to invest in the prevention and the early detection rather than waiting for epidemics to erupt and upend everything on its head. So we really need, they're not investing enough. That is the short answer to that question. No country in Africa has met the Abuja commitment of 15%. There's a very simple R&D budget, target of 1% of the GDP. No country in Africa is meeting this, the 1%, allocation of GDP for R&D. We have all these lofty ambitions. For example, in Africa, I think Asia is really trying lofty ambitions in Africa around the partnership of vaccine manufacturing. Now it's been expanded to include other pharmaceutical commodities. There's very little money or resourcing that has come from local or domestically from Africa member states. And I think this is what must change. Really, if our health is important, our government must know it is important for the people, and it is one thing they need to invest in. And our future depends on that smart investment at the prevention rather than waiting for pandemics to occur. So let's take that message home. Let us mobilize our constituencies and make this an important ask in election times, and we continuously push it through in conversations that government, is listening to. Thank you.
So definitely a lot of work that needs to be done in that front. And basically the summary is that we have to assert as part of civil society to make sure that the governments do their role as duty bearers in terms of preparing us for the next pandemic. So before we actually go to the people who have raised their hands, I'd like to pan on this question. It's quite simple, but I think it's also a very provocative question given that you raised actually an issue of how we define terms as something very political. So one of our participants is asking if we can clarify the difference between a pandemic and epidemic, and then we go to the people who have raised their hands.
Yeah, so the alert phases defines which one is an epidemic and which one is a pandemic. So before it crosses over, when the infection is localized within a community, there's an outbreak, either it's novel or it's a known pathogen, and it's circulating within a community that is not beyond defined jurisdiction of the WHO regions, then it's an epidemic. And I think there are also other factors. We really think it's not enough to just say that we do not need to wait for it to cross. So our reasoning is, so that's what they currently say. So it depends on where, on the geographic spread, severity, and the efficiency of, of its transmission at that particular time. But I think the defining factor is how widespread it is. And that is something that we think is a bit too late, kind of an alert system. I think we need to find other parameters to be able to identify pathogens or pandemic potentials and activate those high alert system before they start spreading actually beyond certain geographic remits. That's when we will be able, our best bet is to activate the highest alert level so that the world collaboratively work together, because what these alert systems do is to trigger response. So if we don't give the highest alert level, then the response is minimal. Like you've seen, cholera has been ravaging the Southern Africa region for like 2 years now, if I'm not wrong. There's been cholera percolating in some countries, I think 12 countries within Eastern and Southern Africa. And there's been no corresponding, support. There's not even a vaccine yet. I think there's just some trial phase that is going on. And that's the kind of political, subjective response that has created disasters that we've seen. Because when it is not in certain regions, it's not as critical. And you've had, I think you may have had Africa CDC asking that they should be devolved, responsibility, because as of now, WHO has the monopoly of declaring, those pandemics of international public health emergencies of international concern. Africa CDC had made a case that I think we need to have a situation where we can declare public health emergencies of continental concerns or sub-regional concerns, and which is something that should trigger response even from the global community, because if you wait for it to cross to your region, it will be too late. You should know that when something erupts in Djibouti or Central African Republic, that disease, depending on how you've studied, and I think the world now is equipped with more information to know the potential pathogens of pandemic potentials, they should be able to activate processes that would help contain it before it spirals out of control. But we are not there yet, so that has been the biggest limitation.
So I think beyond the definitions, the important point that you mentioned is that we have to be proactive in terms of addressing it. So now let's go to Imoro. Kindly unmute so that you can ask your question.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for your submission. My question is on the poor and marginalized in Africa and some parts of Asia. You made us understand that investors are always interested in recouping their profits at the earliest possible time. So in providing solutions, they target populations that can enable them to recoup their profit. I want to know what strategy can be implemented, especially in Africa, where the marginalized society is more, and some parts of Asia, to make sure we also get solutions that can target them as soon as possible, and to make it possible for investors to recoup their profits while still targeting these marginalized and poor people in Africa. Thank you.
Okay, so do we take a few more and then I respond jointly?
Yeah, probably we can collect the questions. Lizzie, go ahead, and then Aggrey can just respond afterwards.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Aggrey, for the breakdown, Pandemic 101. Mine is just to take you back on the role of societies, civil society and community groups, which usually is not defined when we're talking about pandemic preparedness. And I needed to know from your own perspective how that can be tackled, because we saw during COVID-19, communities were only engaged when it was time to take up the vaccines, and most of them did not. because they didn't even know what the vaccines were all about. And that's when the government started engaging civil societies and community groups like YENAS or ETC. So it would be good just to understand what is the role of such kind of organization, especially when we're talking about PPPR, and now that we're really focusing on prevention. And then the next question, which is the last one, is there is a famous saying going around that it's not if the next pandemic happens, but when. And that seems to be like a super scary statement because we don't know when the next pandemic or what even the next pandemic looks like. So what are your thoughts around that particular statement? That seems to be like more of a, you need to be more scared than prepared. Thank you, Aggrey.
Okay. You can take a third one.
Yep. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Eric Okioma from Kisumu, Kenya. One of the things that I would really love to know about pandemics, particularly when it comes to Africa, looking at even the COVID-19, I'm looking at it that we were affected by a public, okay, we can talk about security issues, but now the people that we need to see out there giving out information in terms of devolved level should be public health officers, maybe community health workers giving information, just like my other friend has alluded. But in most cases, what we see, we start seeing the police, we see the military as much as it is multifaceted with no balance. That's why my question that I put on the chart is that what is our standard way? Do we have even standard way, as much as the earlier speaker said that there are certain things that needs to be put in place, but do you have a standard way of doing it such that it cascades down in terms of the response? If there is something in a community, a particular community, you just have a standard way that comes from all the way down here, such that we are able to activate the cells and maybe see how to go about it before it becomes worse, because that also helps in terms of even cascading information. But we have those standard ways. That is my big question, so that we don't get confused maybe in the next pandemic that comes in. Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe-
Thank you. So I can take the three.
Yeah, and then we proceed to the questions on the chat, and then Betty.
Okay. Yeah. So very, very, very insightful questions. I think these are the type of questions we should be asking. So in terms of financing innovation and confirm, you're speaking language. I don't know what that means. All right. So in terms of financing, innovation, so that we can innovate equitably for different regions, not just for certain regions. And I think the question was, how do we make sure that the financiers can recoup their resources while still innovating for the marginalized regions? I think that is where we miss the point, because if our only motivation is to make money from innovations, that's why I said humanity has more solutions than challenges, and we would do ourselves a huge favor if we could redefine our motivation beyond just money, because I think there's no better resource than the human being healthy and being assured of their health and security where they are. They would be more productive, and they would really help the economy grow many, many more times, rather than having to deal with, being worried about outbreaks and when they get sick. But I think we have created a capitalist system where the only motivation for innovation is supposed to be us making money from it. I think humanity deserve a system, or they deserve governments that, we can pool our resources together, because that's what we do by paying tax. And these resources should be used for our benefit to make sure that we are healthy. So innovation should not just be, finance driven, market driven. Innovation should be for human interest and public health interest, and as public goods, particularly on certain issues that have more far-reaching, encompassing risks. that's what we are trying to really build in terms of even the kind of suggestions we're making to the pandemic agreement conversations, that we need to delineate market motivation or market logic from innovating or from the ecosystems that define, from the ecosystem defining factors that touch on goods that are essential to maintain global health security. Those need to be fenced as global public good that people can contribute to as per their capacity and can benefit from depending on their need without having to make any other justification in terms of whether it will bring money back or not. So that would be ideal. So it's something in the financing context we call the GPI, global public global public interest investment models that we know would not be for all. There's so many health issues that capitalists can make money from. But I think we need to be bold enough and say, on these ones that really have the potential of disrupting human existence, we really need to ring-fence this and have a different model of financing these innovations so that the world can be safe and focus on doing the important business of running the world rather than being worried and looking over their back all the time. So that's what needs to change. And I think our governments really need to step in. This need to be public funded, not because innovations don't have to be, a lot of innovations that even for COVID, you realize the pharmaceutical companies that did the last stage progression of the vaccines picked these findings from universities which are public funded. So the public financing is already driving a lot of innovation and has the potential. The biggest research institutes, if you come from Kenya, you come from Uganda, South Africa, most of those universities are public funded. And that is where the base of the innovations come from. Yet when the pharmaceutical industries don't do those early stage innovation, they pick them at late stage when they are now commercially viable. And they buy them off from those public funded spaces. We need to really ring-fence these public funded innovations and have a pathway for certain priority issues. Like, for example, the priority pathogens of pandemic potential are not more than 30. We can have a public funded innovation ecosystem that would help us, have a world that is able to advance this to a level where they are able to be ready and to be used at that quick turnaround time. That's what we're calling 100-day mission. There's also the other concept of 717 concept, which is around 7 days to identify a disease, 1 day to agree on identify, agree on how to manage it, and 7 days to contain it. That would be our best bet, so that it's kept under wrap within where it happens. So that really should change our innovation ecosystem. The role of CSOs, I think, Lizzie, you have this answered more better than me. I think we really have to stop requesting. We need to stop begging. We need to make very unequivocal demands, just like the Kenyan Gen Z have shown us. If you keep begging, you're giving somebody a chance to refuse to involve you. It is our lives, and we need to be part of this conversation. We struggle. It's easier said than done. We struggle even at the A&B. Liz has been following. We've been making demands. The UN system, the human rights system is very clear. People should be involved in any issue at whichever level. That if anything that affects your life, if it's particularly a framework, a treaty, you should be involved in its conversation. But member states are very cagey, and I'm always disappointed by my African member states who have always been pushing back against CSO participation in a lot of these processes. And we need to make those demands for African states. So I'll say in this meeting, those were from Nigeria. In the last modalities meeting, there were 3 member states that refused CSO participation in the INV. It was Nigeria, it was Russia, it was China. It's easy. We need to go like, what is your problem with people who you are discussing issues on their behalf, being part of the process so that they can, support you. We are not competing. We are supporting you. We will be your resource. We will be your human resource. If you need to deploy us, research on this, we'll do research and give you facts of how you need to progress it. Because most of the things CSOs are advancing are pro-LMIC. Yet we find the LMIC regions are the regions that also do not want CSO participation. Actually, it was US that was very supportive. Canada was very supportive. EU was very supportive. Then we have our own who are now like, oh, this is a member state led. I'm very disappointed. I'm sorry. But we need to find ways of just calling them out in their own countries. So if you are in a country where your member state representative in these places are preventing CSO from engaging, call them out. We need to make demands. Like, these conversations are happening, like when you're developing policies at the national level, national public health, security plans, NAPs. We need to be part of that process. We need to make demands from our budgetary system and ask, how much money have you allocated for 1, 2, 3? So this is squarely about us, and we need to define this role for ourselves, and we need to demand that space. Eric, you asked about the role of communities in PPR, and you've seen military response in some instances. That was one of the reasons why we had a lot of failures and why we have a lot of misinformation and disinformation and anti-science sentiment. Because when communities are not involved, they have their own interpretation of, like, Africa, I think as of now, vaccine is available. But because how the world treated Africa, they're like, okay, you can keep your vaccine. When we needed it, when we thought everybody was going to die without the vaccine, you were holding it because you wanted us to die and you survived. Now you're giving it to us because the science have shown that, oh, okay, it's not as that bad. So you can keep it as well. So I think we sometimes create these problems by just being too cagey and being too, liking shortcuts. So communities, what we have known in pandemics, the best chance of really stopping a pandemic is involving the community. Pandemics start and end in community. And I always use the example of Ebola in Uganda. Uganda has really, over the years, learned the ropes of detecting emergence of Ebola. And you've seen successively communities are able to detect them earlier. Even though the last Ebola outbreak, it took 40 days for it to, Betty, I see your hand. It took about 40 days for Ebola to be detected. That is too long. Ideally, it should be 7 days. And you can only detect it within 7 days because the community will be the first person to know if a family member is sick and you have like a consistent different symptom in a community. Instead of just burying people as they were doing in Uganda without questioning, they're like, how can we bury 3 people with symptoms that we've never seen in many years? We need to alert the public health officers so that we can know what we are dealing with. And the public health, so the alert system will start very early because the community will be triggered very quickly because they know the very basic deviations from the norm. So you see people getting certain symptoms that they don't get, they are reported. But we don't use the communities. We don't. Basic health literacy would have helped them detect this within 2 days. And then you're able to contain this. We would have not had a scenario even with COVID. So community is our best bet, particularly in low resource setting. In other contexts, they have very advanced surveillance capacities. They even are testing wastewater every day. In our system, we don't even have the sewerage system. So our surveillance is the people and them being able to see what is happening and reporting it. We don't have any other way. So our communities are our best frontline and our best defense for pandemic prevention and response. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of interesting points there, Aggrey. And I see that Betty is raising her hand, but also we have a question on gendered approaches. But in the succeeding webinars, we have a specific webinar focused on using data for gendered approaches. And later on, in our WhatsApp, we can continue also the conversations just in case that there are some questions that are not addressed here in the chat. Probably any last points, probably Aggrey, before we continue with the discussion. I'll be also sharing the link later to the WhatsApp group.
Yes, so I think there's a lot that needs to be discussed in this. So this was introductory, and I cannot pretend that we'll cover everything. But I think the most important thing for me, having been in this conversation for now 4 years since COVID started, is I think everybody has a responsibility. Anybody who is a human has a role to play in the prevention of potential pandemics. And every part of the world, whether poor or rich, have a role to play in whichever small way. And it is in the interest of everybody to find that motivation beyond this very self-defeating motivation that we often have to get to do what needs to be done. And I think, as somebody said, I think it was Ambassador Nkengasong, who said, in terms of pandemics, we need to think globally, and we need to coordinate regionally, and we need to act nationally, because where the rubber meets the road is at that national community level space where they detect where the outbreak will occur, where the potential to stop it needs to happen. And everybody in that region need to be concerned that if there's an outbreak in Uganda, for example, and you're in Kenya, you're not safe, and you need to find out how you can be of help. And you need to coordinate and lend efforts across the border so that you can all be safe in that region. And everybody in the global ecosystem need to be aware that whatever is happening in Africa, in Asia, is of global significance, because if you don't contain it there, it will be your problem the next day at your doorstep. So we really need to be conscious and supportive of efforts of people in whichever space. So if you're making policies, make policies as if you're making it for your own household. I think what we've been seeing in the INB process is people understanding that it's a shared challenge. Pandemics are shared challenge, but then we opt for very differential, very disparate measures. So people insisting, for instance, that we do not want to disrupt the global trend of health financing. We want to maintain it in the philanthropic space. And okay, all right, things just went blank, so I thought I was off. So, for example, we want to maintain operating in the philanthropic model of things, where people will give excess money that they have, and when they are pressed for other needs or their policies change, they can withdraw it. That is not how to manage preparedness. Preparedness needs predictable resources at scale, and use of those resources based on the needs where it really needs to be deployed to help alleviate a potential crisis that can upend the world on its head like COVID did. So that is how we really need to change our mindset and adopt really solidarity-based approaches in dealing with pandemics, pandemic threats, so to speak. Thank you.
You. What a very fitting end to the discussions for today, and thank you also for the participants who have put in their comments as well as their chats and questions. So with that, I'd like to take this time to thank Aggrey for his very valuable contribution to this discussion. I would like to present this certificate of appreciation for his talk on Introduction to Pandemic Preparedness and Response. So let's give him a round of applause. So I can see a lot of people doing the clap emoji. And if you have some feedback, it would really help us if we can get your insights regarding the first webinar. So you can scan this QR code, and it will lead you to the evaluation form. So again, this is one of the requirements for you to get the certificate of participation. And for succeeding announcements regarding the Copper lesson series, we invite you to follow our social media channels in Facebook, that's Apcaso, and on Instagram _Apcaso. So we will be posting there the announcements. And for the WhatsApp group, so you can scan this QR code. We will also post this in the chat later so that you can easily click on it. And you can actually start sharing your insights by answering this question: what is your key takeaway from the discussion? If you also have relevant articles and resource materials, kindly share them there as well. We also invite Aggrey, if you have headspace and the time to answer and participate in our discussions in the WhatsApp group. That would be really helpful for the participants so that we can maintain this network, because we also want that this webinar does not only happen at one time, but we continue the conversations afterwards. Aggrey, go ahead.
Yeah. So just one last word that I invite you all to join Pandemic Action Network. Pandemic Action Network is a network already of more than 400 partners globally. And we have very, very important conversations, regularly. We've just taken a summer break. Some of you here have been attending our conversations. You will be learning a lot, and you will be connecting to a number of other partners who have more important resources to offer. If you are in Africa, we have the Resilience Action Network Africa's CSOPPR working group, which meet monthly. I will share the details of the lady who coordinates, my colleague who coordinates the platforms, so that you can express your interest. Or you could, I don't know how we can do that, Raymond. I can send you the mail and then the email address, and then you can connect colleagues who are interested to our partnership coordination officer.
Yeah, definitely. We can share the invitation.
Aminata, and I'm sure you have Aminata's contact. You can just share with them Aminata's contact. She'll be able to link them to our various working group platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Aggrey. So please join the discussion, and let's continue sharing insights in that platform. And probably before we end, I'd like to invite Mook so that we can have a quick photo before we end the call.
Hey, for everyone that willing to open the camera, please open the camera so we can have the group pictures together. Okay. Okay, on 3, 2, 1, smile. There we go. Another pictures. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aggrey.
Hi, Olive.
Thank you.
Hi, Olive.
You.
Hi. Thank you so much, Aggrey. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Olive.